But let's say, hypothetically, that we find out that a dog is more happy living with humans that treat them reasonably well, to be happier than it would be in the wildlife. This is a supposition. I'm not saying this is true. I don't know it. But if this was true, if it was true that a human could make a dog happier than it would be in the wildlife, but in what do you base like it being inherently better for a dog to live in the wild that with a human, if the human treats the dog reasonably well, probably better than other dogs, subjective as that may be.
À-bas-le-ciel.
Well, I have some questions, but I don't know if you would like to make some first, just so I am not beneath contempt. Then again, I'm a vegetarian, so that's a bit out of the question.
Yeah, it's cool. We already hate each other. It's cool, man. Just go for it.
Adore. Okay. Well, I've never. Well, first, which, like you were talking about right now, something about we don't need. Vegans don't need to be the majority to have a strong presence or a strong influence, let's say, in society or in the world. Would you say that the movement is moving forward? Like, would you say we are closer right now to vegans or veganism having more power than we were 5 years ago, or would you say that's not true?
Well, the first little caveat there is, what I say is true of democratic societies, and I'm really talking about wealthy, Western, corrupt, decadent democratic societies. So, I mean, you're quite right. You gave a very good summary of what I said there, that we can be only 5% and have a big impact. I believe that is true in Canada. I believe that is true in France and Switzerland. I did have some fans, I don't know if they quit, but on my Patreon channel, I actually had some fans living in Muslim majority countries that are not democracy. And that's a very different question. How can veganism have an impact anywhere in North Africa, anywhere in the Middle East? Totally different question. So I just put that in as a caveat. Now, where you're from, you're from South America somewhere, I take it?
Yes, I am from Ecuador.
Okay, you're from Ecuador. So, I mean, again, I just say I do not assume that advice I gave would even be true of Ecuador. It may be. Like, it may be that I gave advice that's terrific for Ecuador. But, my experience is mostly living in Asia. And how you would organize vegan activism even in Cambodia or in Thailand is totally, totally different. So I just put that in as a caveat because you responded. You gave a very good summary, but then you were talking about the whole world. And in many ways, I'm not talking about the whole world. I'm talking about kind of the richest and laziest and most democratic part of the world. So it's just a caveat I wanted to poke in there. So your question, though, is pretty easy for me to answer. Are things better now than they were 5 years ago? Well, more people even know what the idea of veganism is. So in that really, really basic sense, yeah, things are better. But if you ask, do I feel the vegan movement is moving in a new direction, in a good direction, a positive direction? No. Things are pretty bad within the movement, from the inside looking in, things are pretty bad. But, if you've gone from being completely unknown to being something noticed and that people are aware of, to give you a funny example, here in China, when I went out to a small town near the border with Myanmar, I met a Chinese guy there who spoke English. And when I said that I was vegan, he said, "Oh, so you refuse to eat oil? Like Durian Rider's diet." He said, "Oh, so do you refuse to eat all vegetable oil?" I was like, "No, I'm vegan, So it is kind of weird, but some of those ideas that are really fringe ideas, even within veganism, have become very well known. It's like, God, here I am in China, but not even a normal part of China. I'm way out on the border with Myanmar in the middle of nowhere. And this guy's idea of veganism is vegans are people who refuse to eat oil, who have a low-fat diet, who have a zero oil in their diet, So, it's funny, yeah, so we are known now, and some of the really craziest parts of us are known. But if you actually talk about it as a movement, as a political organization, we're a total failure so far. And you can make a comparison to, like, the Green Party The Green Party may be pathetic, but at least it exists, or other really small political movements. Or I mean, gay rights has been very successful. There are many, many comparisons. But no, veganism, I think if you compare it to any other movement, just thinking about the meaning of the word movement, no, we're a pathetic failure.
Well, I think you could add the caveat that you're not a complete failure. You're a known failure, so you have somewhat some success. Well, something I've always wondered about, but I don't know if it's like maybe I shouldn't ask you because I don't know if I will understand that point of yours, because I know I heard a video of yours talking about it, and it was a long video, and I tried to understand. I just honestly didn't understand. Like, you, in principle, I believe that it would be better, morally speaking, for at least most people to be vegan in most circumstances. There are some circumstances where while I would not eat meat, I wouldn't see it as morally reprehensible. As an example, if I found roadkill, I wouldn't see it as morally reprehensible, just disgusting. But, for example, something that I don't quite get is some of your, like you have, if I understand correctly, you have like a moral principle or ground or base where taking out an animal from what we understand as its natural quote-unquote habitat is usually wrong. For example, with pets, not only with cows, but for example with dogs or cats. Well, with cats it's easier for me to see the point because they are carnivores, and it's more complicated to say the very, very least. But I don't fully understand in what do you base, and please correct me if I'm misrepresenting your point in any way, but in what do you base like it being inherently better for a dog to live in the wild than with a human, if the human treats the dog reasonably well, probably better than other dogs, subjective as that may be. Could you talk a bit about that? It's difficult for me to understand because, for example, obviously there are humans in tribal conditions, and I wouldn't say they necessarily live in a more moral way than we do. For example, humans in their more tribal conditions, usually I would say most of them do need to eat at least occasionally meat. We can get some B12 supplements, we can, other stuff. I don't understand. Am I making myself understand?
Sure. I totally understand, and many people ask me questions about this. The thing I'm questioning, earlier you referred to in passing one dog being treated well or a dog being treated better than another. The fundamental question of values there is what is good for a dog. We obviously have some concept that we create as human beings of what is good for humans and what is good for dogs. My point is that when we ask this about a lion or a penguin, we very clearly start from asking how does the animal live in the wild. So we do keep penguins in captivity, in zoos and in other government programs, because it's very expensive. Very few people own penguins as pets, but probably a few do. Probably a few millionaires own a penguin as a pet. But if you own if you own a penguin, yeah. Oh yeah, good example. Yeah, I thought. Anyway, if you own penguins in your zoo or in your enormous house, and you say, okay, how am I going to treat these penguins well? You start by looking at some scientific facts about how they live in the wild. So what temperature is good for them? How much time do they spend swimming? How much time do they spend standing on the land? How big does the swimming pool need to be? How many of them should live in one group? So like a penguin, obviously there are many species. Penguins are not happy if they're alone, and they're not happy if they're too crowded, but they want to live in a group. So how many members in a group will be happy or be normal or natural? And again, you do have to use the word natural. So it is natural for penguins to live in a social group, not to just have one penguin living all alone in a swimming pool. So it is very clear with some animals that we use the logic of how they live in the wild to, reconstruct what will be an acceptable or good enough environment for them. Now, we may not be able to succeed. Like maybe you just don't have enough money. Maybe you've rescued some penguins. Maybe you have an injured penguin that only has one leg, and you're just trying to provide it with a life so that you don't have to kill it. There are really situations like that. With bears, it's very common. With horses, if you have a horse with 3 legs, what are you going to do? Okay, life isn't perfect. My point was to draw attention to something that is what we call speciesism, which is that vegans, even vegans, turn off their brains and do not think this way at all about dogs and cats. That they do not think about dogs and cats the same way they would think about a penguin or a lion. And I have had some extremely stupid responses from vegans who we would say in English, they double down on that. So I'm trying not to use too many English idioms, but by double down, it just means they accept that this is stupid and they emphasize it. And they write to me very angrily saying, your argument makes no sense because penguins and lions are totally different from dogs and cats. Because bears are totally different from dogs and cats. Well, no, they're not totally different. In some ways, a dog is very similar to a bear. Yes, there are some differences, but there are also some similarities we really need to talk about. So as soon as you have that paradigm, what I call the wildlife management paradigm, which is that you're looking at dogs and cats not as equal to humans, but as equal to bears, as equal to penguins, as equal to lions, then we get into some difficult questions. And I think the simplest solution to those questions is that a happy life for a dog is for it to live in wild conditions, or even if you have a zoo, to live in conditions that are similar to the wild. And we would figure out what those conditions are by studying how they live in the wild, the same way we do for penguins. So, again, once I think you have those fundamental questions answered or those fundamental values in place, I think there are many implications. There are many, it's very clear that long term, the vision I'm looking at is to transition towards a society where we show our respect for animals, not by forcing them to do tricks for humans, not by forcing them to entertain our children, not by taking them to a pet shop and giving them red fingernails or dyeing their hair pink, which is all things people do to pet dogs, by the way. You see it all the time. Not by making them into toys, but by understanding what a life of dignity is for them by studying how they live in the wild. So that's my approach.
I understand some of what you say, but some of the things that confuse me a bit. And maybe depending on your answer on these follow-up questions, I could understand your point more fully. But I doubt you're going to answer them in a way that would actually make me understand it. Like, for example, let's say, this is an hypothesis. I'm not saying I'm pulling this out of any study or whatever. But let's say, hypothetically, that we find out that a dog is more happy. Let's define it as, I don't know, more endorphins, happy endorphins going around its brain. It can generally be more happy living with humans that treat them reasonably well. Yes, I know it's a subjective term, but we can more or less imagine what it is. Anyways, like there's a range of how a human can treat a dog for it to be happier than it would be in the wildlife. This is a supposition. I'm not saying this is true. I don't know it. But if this was true, if it was true that a human could make a dog happier than it would be in the wildlife, there.
Sure, but look, I don't understand. I think I can shortcut that because in a sense I've already conceded the point when we talk about injured animals. So if you talk about a bear with only 3 legs, or you talk about a penguin that has maybe a broken wing, or one wing is injured, then it's very easy because you can say, if we put this penguin back in the wild, it will die. If we put this bear back in the wild, it will die. It would be true, I think, with a 3-legged dog too, whatever. So the reason why I include that, sorry, we have some funny comments in the comment section. If I start laughing, it's because somebody says something funny. Sorry. This is.
That's true. Yeah, you have change your wardrobe 3 times.
It's true.
Oh
It's
God, there's so much sexual tension. That's
it's no. I assure you, it's not because of the sexual tension. I've changed my wardrobe. It was freezing cold in here. It was freezing cold when I started broadcasting, and now I'm down to my t-shirt because it's warmed up here. Yeah. But
perfectly reasonable. Yeah, I'm sure.
well, you see, I think the majority of my fans right now are female. You might be the only male in the room right now. But anyway, no, we got a couple of men. We got a couple. Anyway, look. So I was just gonna say, I think that I'm actually giving you that point when I talk about injured animals, because then the choice is between death and life, right? And still, I just say, like, with many of these things, I don't think I have to have an answer that's 100% rational and perfect. If you're talking about a very wealthy society, like Canada is basically one of the richest countries in the world, but still, we, do not have the money to treat bears properly. We have many, many problems with bears in Canada. We have a huge number of bears. And most of the time, if you call the government, they will just kill the bear instead of even using a tranquilizer, because then if they put the bear to sleep, they have to put the bear on a truck, they have to take it away it's too expensive for the government to do. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous, but that is the reality right now in Canada. So if you ask, is it better to provide this bear with a home, whether it's in a zoo or in a person's house or a backyard, I think the answer is going to be idiosyncratic, it's going to be illogical, it's going to be emotional, and I sort of accept that. But I used to live in Laos and Cambodia. What do you think? What do you think happens to a three-legged bear in the conditions of poverty? We're going to kill the bear. And as vegans, we can pretend we would never kill a bear. Fuck you. These are third world conditions. This is real political, this is political reality. Now, even in Canada, I don't know, we could pass a law in Canada to force the government to stop killing bears. That's an interesting question. It really is. And you would then have a budget of millions of dollars for helping these bears. It really is an interesting question in Canada, because in theory, our government has unlimited money, but in other ways, we're running out of money. So, okay, is that a priority or not? But I just say, for me as a vegan, I want to be realistic. There are vegans who say they will never even kill mice, that we should have a society where mice and rats are never killed. And I ask, have you ever been to a farm? Whether it's a farm for fruit or a farm for, grain, the reality is we are going to continue killing mice and rats. That may be immoral, that may be bad. Now, on the other hand, if you personally rescue a three-legged bear, and let's just say you have a house with a big garden, and you keep that bear, okay, maybe, many vegans will say you're wonderful. Many vegans will praise you and say you're a wonderful human being for saving a three-legged bear. Many. Thousands and thousands of vegans.
I have bear scratches all over my face.
Well, and you will have a very popular YouTube channel. You can have YouTube videos of you and your three-legged bear having fun, and everyone will say, well, here's the problem. Every day you have to buy meat to feed the bear. So now you're killing cows to feed a bear. So to me, this is again anti-vegan. So most of these animals we're talking about do eat meat. Yes, there are some exceptions. I mean, rabbits do not eat meat. Rabbits only eat vegetables. But unless we're talking about a herbivore animal, then we have another very difficult ethical question. Even penguins. Every day you keep penguins alive, you're killing fish. So why are we killing cows to keep this three-legged bear alive? Really, why? Now, you asked the question. I understand. Your question was, what if the bear has a better life as a pet than it would in the forest? And with a three-legged bear, it definitely is. But my question also is that ethical question. That's all. Don't worry, I'm done talking. But I would say, for me, it's not just about the bear, or it's not just about the dog, or not just about the cat. It's also about all the cows that you're killing every day to keep that pet alive. And for vegans, this then gets very uncomfortable. It's very difficult to answer that question.
I did include in my question that I wouldn't say that for cats because they are carnivores. Yeah. So, correct me if I'm wrong, could I summarize your point with, in general, no, because usually it would mean indirect support of, or practically, it would mean a support of somehow support the killing of other animals in many cases, but you would concede that in some very specific cases, for example, a vegan three-legged dog, maybe it would be morally conceivable to keep the pet.
Well, yeah, I think my real answer to that is basically that in the real world, these decisions are going to be made very emotionally, they're going to be made irrationally, and they're going to be made on a case-by-case basis in an idiosyncratic way. The reality is, but I just say the reality is if there is one specific elephant, and it has, whether it has 3 legs or whatever, there's one elephant, and everybody in the newspaper is saying this is such a wonderful elephant. This happens sometimes. For some reason, the elephant becomes famous, and then people donate money, then this elephant will be saved. That's the reality of the world we live in. And sometimes vegans support that kind of thing, and sometimes vegans say this is speciesism, this is stupid. Why are we helping this one elephant and we're ignoring a million cows or a million sheep? So both impulses are there. I'm just saying I accept that it's not going to make sense. But I also say we need to accept, or we need to look at the reality of the fact we can't save all bears. Maybe it would be great if we could. We can't save all rats. We can't. So right now, the reality is a particular bear. In Canada, we had 2 bear cubs, so 2 baby bears. And, some photographs of them were put in the newspaper. And then everyone wanted to save these 2 baby bears. Well, okay, we can. Just because their photograph is in the newspaper and they're cute, we can. But, if you tell me we're going to have a no-kill policy for all bears everywhere in Canada, I believe me, as a vegan, I would love to have that debate. But I just say the answer is not going to be rational. And obviously, people making these decisions about their own dogs are totally irrational. And people making these decisions about their own cats. And, currently in the Muslim world, really specifically in the Arab world, it is very popular for people to own giant cats. So, not just lions and tigers, but leopards and that kind of thing. So there are people who own those types of predatory cats. So it is actually fashionable to own those. And people are making those decisions every day. And I think they're totally irrational. But in a sense, I accept the irrationality. You know what I mean?
But something, wouldn't you say, at least it's usually my personal opinion, I would like your take on that morality, at least for me, it must pass through reason, because, anything that you want to be reasonably practical will have to pass through reason so that it has efficient or effective effect. Sorry, the redundance in reality. But I would say that morality is usually based in emotion. Like for example, I would say, like, at least to me, most of what I consider morality, I know there are other conceptions, but most of what I consider morality is usually based on emotion, like on the fact of you don't want others to suffer, and if you can promote well-being at a reasonable cost, then that is morally superior just because of the sake of it being well-being. And there's not really a rational... There comes a point where you must say, like, this is the objective, and you can have a rational, you can, like, have a rational discussion of why you chose this objective, but ultimately it will depend on prior objectives. Like, you can say, for example, let's save let's save the dolphins here, and ultimately the reason is gonna be I love dolphins, they're cute, I like them. Yeah. It can be completely different, but maybe you get my point. Like, isn't morality usually based on emotion? Like, it doesn't mean it has to be irrational in the fact that it doesn't need to be completely divorced of reason. But I think, I don't know, like, what's your take? Isn't morality usually, for many people, based on emotion?
Well, look,
even when it's in a less pretty way, to some people, some moral dilemmas are based on wrath, on vengeance. That does exist. Like the concept of you must punish him because he did this shit and I'm so fucking angry, and it would be morally wrong for him to be, whatever, when he was so wrong what he did, and fucking torture him.
Yeah. Sure. Look, I do. I mean, the sense in which many people think I'm a pessimist, but I mean, one of the ways in which I'm an optimist is that I do think we're going through a period of real cultural progress in that. Just when I was a child, people would be discussing that issue, the question of whether or not you should help the the dolphins while wearing leather gloves and leather shoes and seeing no conflict with that. And the fact that we progressed to the point where at least the people who are having that debate about cute dolphins, at least they realize that there's a serious moral obligation on them not to wear leather shoes, not to wear leather gloves. That if you want to advocate for animal rights, veganism is kind of a prerequisite. You can't be, so this is actually a very significant form of progress. Now, again, the other really optimistic examples I use are gay rights and smoking, even alcohol. The idea of how much alcohol consumption is normal and natural, this has changed a lot. So, you're correct. You sketch out the reality of a world in which most moral conversations and moral decision making is very irrational and very emotional. But of course, the cultural context for that, the questions that even get asked,
Sorry, saying not necessarily devoid of reason, but it that something has its basis in emotion, to me doesn't need to mean that it is devoid of reason. You can do whatever you want in a very practical, well thought and planned way, and you do it because, I don't know, any emotional reason you choose. I would divorce the concept of irrational and emotional, because while emotion in itself is not rational, the presence of emotion does not make you into a, I don't know, drooling, you get what I'm saying, maybe?
Yeah, but my point was that the context for all that is cultural, and it really does change with time in dramatic ways. There was a guidebook, a tourist guidebook for Europe. I forget when. Let's say this is the year 1300, and it very casually described how people would pass their time in England by going to watch executions. And this guidebook, this is just a stupid example, but it was describing a man being tortured to death in public in the middle of the city for having stolen a stack of paper. So, in English we say stationery. Now paper was more expensive at the time, but still it's an absurd crime. Now at that time, in many parts of, Christian Europe, people believed that if you committed a very small crime, you were an evil person. So it didn't matter. Like the fact that you made this one small theft, you could basically be punished as the same as a murderer, because a person who would commit a small crime is an evil person who's willing to commit a big crime. So those are cultural assumptions. Another one that's very dramatic. Well, another change that's very dramatic, again within Christian Europe and the world that they were colonized. It used to be very common for men to fight duels, to fight a duel to the death. And many people point this out in America, because in America the laws never changed. So in the first few decades after the American Revolution and the American Constitution, it was still completely normal for men to fight each other to death with swords or with guns over a point of honor. And a point of honor really could be like, you said my girlfriend was fat, so now we're going to kill each other. That was a normal part of American culture. At the same time, it was a normal part of Italian culture, by the way. I mean, different countries within Europe had different cultures of dueling and men fighting each other to death. And if it ever went to court, the judges would dismiss it. That was not considered murder. That was not considered a crime. If two men agreed that they would fight each other to the death, then that wasn't murder. That wasn't assault. That was completely normal. So the irony is, in America, in most countries in Europe, since that time, they've had new revolutions, new laws, new constitutions. So, France has had so many revolutions, nobody can count. Obviously, some people count. But I say France has had their law rewritten many, many times. America, actually, the law never changed. So, hilariously, there's still a country kind of built on those norms. So what changed? Now, yes, people are emotional. Yes, people are willing to kill each other over these kinds of short-term emotional and irrational decisions. These are these examples are illustrations of that. But still, you can say one sense in which I'm an optimist is that I can see very real progress over 300 years. And questions that weren't even asked before now get asked. I think today, if somebody insults me, there's absolutely no tolerance for escalating it into a deadly contest. There's no tolerance for that at all. And instead, the question being asked is, well, he insulted you, but why did you make the situation worse? Why did you make it more hostile? So, again, without even legislation changing, a different set of cultural attitudes shapes the moral questions and shapes the moral answers. So, again, it may seem trivial or it may seem small, but the fact that people now are not wearing leather gloves when they ask those questions, I think does lead to different answers. I think we're in a period of that kind of cultural change. And I hope vegans can be leaders of that cultural change instead of being a bad joke in the middle of that cultural change.
What do you... Oh, by the way, only if it's kind of a short answer, but someone asked in the chat, what would you think about someone owning a fish tank and just feeding the fish, I assume, vegan stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's bad, but for me as a vegan, it's not in my top 10 list for activism. I mean, there's a woman here I will admit I was somewhat attracted to here in China, who I was chatting with, and one of the distinctive things about her, she owned these very colorful fish that I happen to know a lot about. It's a long story why I know about these fish involving another woman, but anyway. She owned what are called Thai fighting fish. These are fish from Thailand. And one day I stopped by and chatted with this woman. And I said, "Oh, what happened to all your fish?" Because they're very, very bright and colorful. And this is a type of fish that wants to live alone. They're not happy in a group. In nature, if two of them are put together, they'll kill each other. They'll fight to the death. So they're relatively popular because you can keep one fish in each fishbowl, sort of thing, and they're happier that way. Anyway, that's also an interesting question. Again, I looked into that. If you want them to be happy, again, you have to recreate their natural conditions as closely as possible, which includes places for them to hide, places they feel safe. There are all these different things. And she said, one day it was cold and they all died. That's it. They're evolved for that climate in Thailand, and here in Kunming, it's too cold and they all died. I think inevitably, if you're going to own animals as a decoration, if you're going to own animals as a form of entertainment, this is the result. Of course, they're disposable. Of course, their lives mean nothing. In a sense, I think their lives mean even less than animals being raised for meat. So yeah, it's bad. Now, on my list of things to do as a vegan, screaming at people who keep fish as pets is nowhere on the list. But I do think in terms of the human attitudes involved, I think it's very clear to see that there is a cycle of suffering there that I think any vegan has to kind of object to. But if you want to make exceptions, with everything there are exceptions. Obviously, some people have scientific reasons. They have some legitimate reason to keep fish in captivity. But it's bad. If that's what you want to hear from me.
What was it? I was thinking while you were telling me the thing about the fish and the women, like, if you wrote about this somewhere, like maybe as a blog or whatever, like I could imagine the story about the fish and the women being something like, there's a lot of fish. How's the idiom in English? Like, there are a lot of fish in the sea. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's one of the advantages of me being on YouTube now. Back when I used to write a blog, people got more easily offended by this. I think people are aware of the human reality. I mean, right now I'm streaming this live. We're talking voice to voice. You know what I mean? I think that actually there were a lot of advantages to doing this in video format. So we'll see. But I mean, I think actually that same story, probably if I wrote it in a blog, I can imagine pretty easily the type of hate mail I would get from past experience. But yeah, but because we're talking about gray areas, we're talking about conflicting things, right? So
I mean, surely you can talk without there being someone hating about it somewhere. Surely, come on.
No, every video.
Somewhere I heard like you cannot say something meaningful without someone hating on it.
Yeah.
I would say, like, if you manage to say something without someone hating on it, you probably haven't have a real audience.
Yep.
And it truly was not meaningful. Like,
Right.
I don't know. Yeah. A lot of non-meaningful stuff still receive a lot of hate.
Sure. Every video I put up, I get some comments from people saying, "You're fat, you're ugly, you're stupid." And I get some comments from women saying, hey, I heard you're single. I want to meet you. Let's hook up. So, you get this range of responses, most of them shallow. No, but I mean, to give credit where it's due, I really do appreciate my audience. And I do get philosophical and really meaningful responses from people, sometimes talking about their own lives, sometimes talking about the political issues involved. And look, I want to give credit to you too, Alejandro. We've now talked for more than 30 minutes. We never talked before. But I think your questions are meaningful. Like, I don't think this is bullshit. I don't think this is a waste of anyone's time. And so, you create content, and then you hope that the people who need to see it will find it. And sometimes the people who need to see it are the people who want to see it. And, sometimes the people who need to see it are people who hate it and who get very angry seeing it. But maybe that has an impact too, right? Maybe something good comes from that.
I gotta say, like, almost, I think I've never heard a video of yours. You've definitely raised some points I'm not necessarily, I don't necessarily agree. Usually I at least can see your perspective, but, like, I don't think I've ever heard a video of yours so far, and I don't think I have heard, like, a fourth of them, but still, I don't think I have heard a video of you so far that I found, I don't know, like, stupid. Like, you're actually entertaining, and sometimes it's entertaining, because you get these very nuanced points, although they tend to be interesting issues. That's a comment I would give you. Like, I usually enjoy your videos even if I don't agree. They're interesting perspectives, if nothing else.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate that. Go ahead. You can keep talking. It's cool.
Really. What was the? Could you talk a bit about how has the kids book going? I find that very very interesting. I think, like, these little things that people many times don't put a lot of weight in. I do think, like, something like a kids book. Someone was saying in the chat, Corm or something, like children being a good place to put some effort when you want, like, to normalize a behavior or to make it a bit more mainstream. Because, well, it is true that you don't need to be a majority or even half the population to have an impact. Obviously, if more than half of the population eats meat or animal products, obviously there will be slaughter. Like, it's not gonna all come from roadkill, But I find the project really really interesting. Like, how has that been going?
Basically, I've been talking to different illustrators. I got a new email from one illustrator today, or within the last 24 hours. The illustrators I talked to who are actually successful, like people who are already earning their money making children's books, they're busy. So one of them, who is a professional illustrator, she said she would talk to me again in December. So she told me that a few months ago. So I guess we're going to talk again soon. And there was another illustrator who is vegan who did reply to me and said she was interested, but then never replied again. I think the other good news is that most of those illustrators, they do not get paid very much money per page. And the book is not that long. I assume if you search, by the way, for the word storybook on my channel, just for anyone who's listening to this, if you search for the word storybook, you'll get a couple of different videos that include the script, because it's now been translated into a few languages already. So it's in English, it's in Chinese, it's in Russian. I think I've got a German translation coming. A Swedish translation too. So a lot of people are excited about the book just based on what I've written. But yeah, you talk to illustrators on a case-by-case basis, and I mean, I may have to do fundraising if the illustrator wants a few $100s for each page, to be paid at the start. And if I decide that's really the best illustrator I can get, then we would have to do fundraising for that. So as you know, it really is a shame. I am frustrated that the court case in Thailand is not finished, that it hasn't been completed yet, because people obviously expect me to complete that court case before I do fundraising for another cause. So I don't know. I'll at some point I'll have to look at that. I'll have to look at when are we finally going to finish this court case in Thailand, and should I do fundraising for that? But maybe I can work with an illustrator who will just be happy to do the illustrations for a percentage of the money that's generated. But this book is going to generate very little money. I mean, this is really a charity project to make this book available. And so that's, I guess I'm a combination of optimistic and pessimistic about that. But I think maybe the bad news is it really is possible that the court case will either delay or kind of sabotage trying to get the book to happen. And as I mentioned recently in another video, Durian Rider and Cheetah, they openly said that when I try to do fundraising for the book, they would sabotage it. However, the good news is if I was doing fundraising for the book, it would be very little money. The total amount of money would be so low that it might not matter. So.
Oh yeah, what the fuck with that? Like when I heard that in a not so like kind of recent video, I was like, what the fuck? Like what the fuck happened? Right. Do you have any like how? I can't imagine someone like being peripherically interested in veganism and wanting to fuck up this kind of project, even if it is of someone you despise or hate or whatever. It's like, why would you try to fuck up that? That's just, damn it. Like, do you have how do you know that this happened? Like this meaning to sabotage it?
Oh, because they did it on the internet. Because it was broadcast. It's not secret. So, no, the only reason I know about it, they talked about this on the internet. No, it's not a rumor. But, look, I was going to say, again, because it's great talking to you, but we've now gone 40 minutes, so I should wrap it up. But, the sad thing is I had a video a few months ago talking about the idea of dying for veganism, of getting killed because you're vegan. It was actually in response to another YouTuber, Henya. She was saying she was going to quit YouTube because she was afraid she would get killed. Now, I think it's bullshit, and she hasn't quit YouTube, and I think she wasn't really afraid of getting killed. But in any case, whether or not that was bullshit, that video I raised a bunch of questions. What does it mean to live for the cause? What does it mean to die for the cause? Something that's really sad that is reflected in this whole discourse connected to Durian Rider and the court case and the storybook. Why is it that the threat to me is from other vegans? I'm not afraid of the meat industry killing me. I'm not afraid of the meat industry stopping that book from getting published. That's no problem. The dairy industry, the milk industry, they're not trying to stop the book from getting published. Other vegans are trying to stop me from publishing a children's storybook that's, supports veganism. It's vegan propaganda for children, right? So that is, sadly, that's, I think, the deepest and the shallowest lesson we have to draw from this, is that I'm spending my time managing hostility from and sabotage, I think is the word, from other vegans. And I don't need them to support me, but that is really what we have to reflect on. Anyway, it's been great talking to you. I do hope that at some point in the future you'll become vegan. It's always nice to open the door to someone who's not yet vegan, but obviously you're already interested enough that you get the whole point of the movement. I can tell from this conversation. I didn't know when I had you on. I didn't know if you were going to be a bit of a troll or someone who wasn't really interested, but obviously you already get the point, and you're already interested in some of these more nuanced and sophisticated questions about how we treat animals in the wild and the long-term prospects for the movement. So it's great. It's great to meet you, Alejandro. And look, life is long. Maybe I have you on the show again 1 year from now, maybe 5 years from now. I don't know. My life here in China is unpredictable, but it would be great to get you on the show sometime and hear about what's going on in South America and maybe how your own views have changed. Because 1 year is a long time on the internet. Maybe 1 year in the future, you would really have a different perspective on many of these things.
À-bas-le-ciel.